Okay, today we're going to be talking about the first civilizations from the Paleolithic into the Neolithic era. Now, this is going to be an archaeological investigation into the world's earliest societies, inclusive of cultural and religious beliefs. Now, I want to say this is that when we think about civilization, immediately we think about Mesopotamia. We think about Egypt. We think about, civilizations that occur, during the 300, the 3000s BCE, 2000s BCE. And all of a sudden, here comes Dr. Rietveld, and he's talking about civilizations that occur during the Paleolithic and Neolithic age. I don't know. I think that's a little early. So what exactly is going on here? Well, I'm going to tell you what exactly is going on here. So the question is, first of all, what is a civilization? We have to identify our terms. First of all, civilization involves a populated settlement. Okay, well, that settles that, right? That has some kind of hierarchical social classes. So that's good, right? We sometimes there is a ruling party, maybe a ruling elite. They oftentimes have a form of territories, including rural areas around it. And they're connected to pursuits such as agriculture, manufacturing, trade. They are also defined by religious beliefs and, well, cultural values. And they wield an organizing power over humans, as well as dominating the natural environment around them and the use for their needs. So if we take many of aspects of that under consideration, to be honest, Mesopotamia is not early enough. We can go way further back, and some of those same components exist. But of course, we go into the realm of controversy, right? So, and of course, why not? So we're going to take a strictly academic approach to this question. So I don't delve in pseudo archaeology, but I will go into archaeological investigations when it comes to this question, and I'll be very careful and I'll be sensitive. But before that, let's just get things going. All right. So when it comes to the development of humanity, we kind of go through 4 different stages during the Paleolithic age. And so these stages have been defined by Robert Benerick of the Archaeological Group of the Netherlands and James Harold, the founding chair of the Prehistoric Religions Consultation Unit, and as well as others. And it's broken down into 4 groups. Basically, during the Paleolithic age, you start off what is called the mimetic modeling period. Mimetic modeling period. And that goes from 2.6 to around 1.6 million BCE. That's the mimetic modeling period. And, you're going, oh boy, you are going straight academic. Don't worry, I'll kind of liven it up here and there. But what exactly is that? Well, we take a look at the material culture. We take a look at the objects that humanity makes, and we realize that, well, there's nothing much going on. So, so when it comes to using stone tools, because the Paleolithic era is defined by the beginning of the use of stone tools, and it ends with the advent of agriculture. So during this period of time, the mimetic period is what it is. When you think of a mime, you think of, right? That's a mime. So basically, humanity mimics their surroundings, even when it comes to their stone tools, their objects, which are basically, it is what it is. That's a fancy way of saying, hey, I got a rock. Okay, bang, bang, bang. Ooh, look, it's sharp. I'm gonna, dig with this. I'm going to hunt with this. Yeah, you got the idea. Not much going on. Okay, so let's just skip on and go to the next level. Is there any civilization going on? No. So the next level is the conceptual meaning modeling. The conceptual meaning modeling kind of overlaps a little bit on the mimetic period. And that goes from 1.9 million BCE to around 500,000 BCE. Now, this period of time is now all of a sudden, we see conceptions, ideas in the material culture. We see that the tools, there's something going on. There's, they're used for a particular purpose and they're fashioned in a certain way to facilitate that. So this is a period of lots of biaxes everywhere, biface axes everywhere. And once again, not much is going on, but we know that there's concepts there. I have to say, when it comes to humanity, we really can understand how humanity cognitively advances based on the stone tools they make, right? And we could see that the mimetic period, not much is going on, but they're not living very long, So basically, they're living to the ripe old age of, 20 years old, perhaps, maybe not even that, So beyond the fact that maybe they're, humanity's brains are not well developed yet, it could also be the fact that they're just not living long enough to transfer that knowledge, because by the time the kids start to become able to learn things, mom and dad are long gone. So not much of the transmission of knowledge. And so there you have it, conceptual meaning modeling. And we move on to the next level, and that's called the abstract idea modeling. The abstract idea modeling from 500,000 to 30,000 BCE. Now, all of a sudden, we have moved from just mimicking things, right, to conceiving things, now to thinking abstractly. So now we start having more symbols that are being used, abstract symbols that represent various ideas, sometimes human heads and skulls and so forth. And so we start to think in an abstract sense. Once again, not a lot of civilization going on here, which is the topic of the talk. But I do want to say a few interesting bits and pieces. This is where we can discern the origins of understanding or conceiving that there could be, lots of qualifiers there, could be religion. Religion could be forming. What's my evidence? So around 90,000 BCE, they discovered at the Skull Cave in Kafza, that's in Israel. They found at this cave some interesting remains. First of all, they found skeletal remains stained with red ochre paint, surrounded by grave goods, with one of the skeletons holding a mandible from a wild boar. So you could see there that I heard some interesting noise there. So you could see there that there's something kind of going on here, right? You're thinking, and this is the beginning of many other things that will happen soon, because what will happen is from here on out, we just go wild with red ochre paint. I mean, really wild. I mean, red ochre paint is used all the time from here on out, all throughout the world. And of course, red ochre paint, what does that mean? And you see, well, they'll think about this. So they're painting the bones with red ochre paint. Wait. Oh, that means, yes, that means that the flesh has to be off the bones before they're able to paint it, right? So and there's little bird peck marks on these bones. So we know that they use excarnation. Excarnation is basically they take the body and let the birds clean off the flesh, and then they paint it. But why would they paint it red? What's red? Well, of course, blood is red. So maybe it's the idea of transforming or transferring, I should say, the life force onto the bones in some way, in a ritualistic sense. That's a possibility. It could actually mean quite a few things, but we know that it seems to be some kind of preparation that connects to a semblance of some idea of maybe an afterlife, but still that something needs to be done to these bones in a ritualistic way to protect them and to ornament them accordingly. And you know what? I'm sorry, that's religion. There's no bones about it. Actually, there are bones about it, lots of bones, but I digress. So that's fascinating. So this is during the period of time. In fact, they go crazy. I always like for example, the Pavilion Cave in Wales from a 20,000 BCE. They actually soaked the skeleton completely in red ochre paint. It was called the Red Lady for many years until they discovered that it was the bones of a man. But whatever, woohoo, but also during this period of time, people start being buried with flowers, like at the Shandar Cave in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq. We know that a person was surrounded by sweet scented garlands and flowers. We see this, in fact, all over the place. So lots of things going on there. In fact, also what I find is interesting, in the Tosidial Hills in the Kalahari Desert of Africa, around 40,000 BCE, they found, which is fascinating, they found what's called a bear cult. What happened is that they looked at the artwork, and they basically, we realized that what they found basically is, it's kind of fascinating, is they found how do I say this? There's an image that shows somebody throwing something that looks like a bear, and then beside it, you got a bear body that's buried. I know, lots of bears. And next to it, buried separately, is a bear head. Then next to that is like this kind of almost clay mixed in, kind of and there's like bear fur in it, so it's kind of a deferment. I'm here all day. So the idea is, apparently they're trying to capture the spirit of this bear and put into a totem. So it's kind of totematic. Is that fascinating? So yeah, but those people, nothing but the bare necessities. All right, but is there civilization? The answer is no. Okay, so then we get to the mythic linguistic modeling period, 40,000 to 10,000 BCE. And this is Paleolithic age. Do we have civilization? Ding, 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 ding. Yes, we do. Suddenly, we do. What happens now, basically, is, you had the abstract modeling, which had symbols, but now these symbols are put in sequences, which seems to be a semblance of the beginning of language. So we are talking, we are communicating, conversation is happening. And, once people start talking, a civilization starts to come about, because they can communicate in a better way. Our tongues are ready to have the conversations, apparently. Tongues are wagging. But this is still the hunting gathering era, right? Hunting and gathering. So I'll go more into this a little bit later. But what will happen now is that we have, I'm skipping sections here. We have, of course, I'm not going to talk about the Lascaux caves. That's really interesting, but it's not. All right. Well, now I mentioned it. Now everybody's going to say, "Hey, I want to hear about the Lascaux caves." All right. So basically, this is in southwestern France, around 13,000 BCE. It was discovered by four curious teenagers in 1940, and don't forget their dog Robot. I like that name for doggy. And they found this cave with very realistic images of animals, along with abstract geometrical designs and painted dots that correlated exactly with various constellations, which is pretty cool, revealing they had a knowledge of the night sky. Now, while 900 animals have been identified, 605 of them are exactly known, including 364 horses, 90 stags, representations of cattle and bison. They found a single bear, 7 felines. So, they found a rhinoceros. I'm going to pause there for a second. This is southern France. So you're picturing like a rhinoceros wandering around southern France. There you have it. They found a bird, erux. Yeah, and they found only one human image there. I guess we're not as popular. What I find is interesting is that we take a look at what people ate. And they like to eat mammoth and reindeer, because what we do is we find their campsites and we find what they eat. It's interesting that nothing that they are, the majority of what they're eating is not depicted on the caves. Did you guys notice that? And I think that is interesting enough as it is, because, you're thinking to yourself, wait a second, if well, that means that that we were taught that it was that they would paint the object, and then because they're going to hunt it, and then they ritually kill it, right? And then they go out and they take, because they want to capture its spirit, and they go out and get it. But what do you do when the food that they're mostly eating is not on there? And so some have said it had some other religious symbolic meanings and not necessarily hunting. Also, these caves are hard to get to. You have to, at that time, you had to really take a great effort to get up there in the first place, which again, seems to have more of a religious feel to it. Are you following me? Right? So it could be used for something entirely different, but we all know that this is what archaeologists always say, and we got Jack here, who's another one, right? When we don't know what it's used for, we just say it's used for symbolic purposes, ritual purposes, and we just kind of leave it at that and run away quickly, But there's no hubris, right, going involved with all this. So there you have it. I did talk about that. So back in the Paleolithic age, before we get settled, we're going to get settled, and we get settled, we get civilization. Basically what happens is that people, they go from campsite to campsite on average during the Paleolithic era in Europe. Now, of course, I can't speak for everywhere else in the world, because my specialty is Europe going into the Middle East. So on average, they have about 4 to 6 campsites each year. And what they do is they move with the seasons. And how do they know the seasons are going to change? Because they look at the stars. Because as you know, the Earth, it moves, right? I move the Earth. So you have, of course, you have the equinox, you got solstices and so forth. And so what happens is that when the Earth, tilts, here, it's tilting here. Okay, it looks like it's getting really warm. So that would be what? What kind of solstice are we going to have here? Looks like a summer solstice, doesn't it? And we go, okay, now we have the vernal equinox. Oh no, we're having the winter solstice, right? Oh, we're back here, and then no, then we're finding this, right? Of course, all the spring equinox, and so we bend back and forth, and the stars in the sky change accordingly. So when they look at the stars, they go, oh, look, it's time to move to another location. You go, but doctor, we're talking about civilizations. Yeah, but guess what? We're talking about civilizations. They start to sometimes line up their cities and villages according to these, to also tell the stars. So we'll get there. But so yeah, they know when to move. But then again, they think, hey, you know what? Maybe because the stars move, maybe it's the stars that have the power over us. It changes the seasons after all, right? Because the stars are different. And look, it's cold. Look, it's hot. It must be the stars. So we got to have this relationship with the, you get where. So you got this beginning of an astral kind of a belief system and religion. So, and I find that very interesting. So, so what happens from here, going on, is that also, of course, the other thing is that men typically were the hunters. Women were typically the gatherers, but this is not always the case. But there are reasons why the men typically are the hunters, and we, of course, we find grave goods, and they're buried with hunting implements. But the point is, the reason why is because women do something that's pretty amazing. Yeah. So what happens? It goes as follows. All right. So what happens is that women suddenly get bigger and bigger. And look, they have a baby, right? And of course, the guy is so happy. He's like, wow, looks just like my best friend. Because they're clueless. They have no idea that they have a part. They're living so long, such short lives. They haven't figured out that maybe, so they believe that women have these magical powers of creativity, of fertility, and they connect that idea also with the earth, because after all, the earth also creates. So earth must be mother. Does that make sense? But of course, the other part is that raising the babies, right, means that you may have to stay closer to the settlement area as you go from place to place to place. And the other part is a part that everybody forgets that happened all the way for a very long time, and that is humans are cheap. We like free things, and milk is in free supply. So breastfeeding typically continued to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 years of age. Which of course also kept women closer to the camp for that reason, lactating, right? And people don't think about that. By the way, this continued in many cultures all the way up into the 20th century. And I know a few examples. I actually know somebody who was raised that way. So yeah, you come from a Latin American background, some places had those traditions, and it continued long, like in Puerto Rico. Did you guys learn things quickly? Okay, too much. Also, women do something else magical every month. And it happens and it's magical, 3 to 4 days, Oh, how wonderful that is, right? Well, of course, the problem is when you go hunting, animals smell blood. And so you got predator and you got prey. So predators and prey, whoop. So there's reasons why, okay? It has nothing to do with patriarchy. In fact, tell you a secret, it actually enforces more of an egalitarian society. You see, what you don't know is that when the men go hunting, they go hunting for a longer period of time, which means that whoever happens to be at that campsite, they're the ones taking care of things. And so we find, this is everywhere, especially in Europe, we find so many females, skeletons, surrounded by rich, elaborate grave goods during this period, because they turn out to be the leaders. Because the men, they're not there. Who's going to take care of things? And I actually have a whole list of examples that I don't have time to go through, but there's a whole bunch of, we keep finding them. We do find a few men, but mostly it's women. Isn't this fascinating, right? Yeah, okay. So that's kind of what happens. Also, hunting is pretty easy because you got these, rhinoceros, of course, but you also have the mammoth, you're good for a while. And when reindeer, you're good for a while. And that's great. I mean, it's great because it's plenty of meat. You catch one of those, you're set for a little while. But there's a problem. Did you know that people then a large portion of what they ate was then meat? Once again, how do I know this? It's called paleo poop. Paleo poop. We take a look at their fecal matter, and we realize, hey, you know what? There's a little bit of vegetative materials, but there's a lot of proteins, mitochondria. Yeah. And in fact, we have it down where we know exactly the kind of animals they ate, of course. And the other part is, poop really piles up, and people are traditional. And this kind of leads to a settled society, which we'll talk about in a few seconds, because what happens is people go to the same campsites. And so they all go to the same cave, and they all go number 2 in the same cave. So we can do stratigraphy, and we can see the changing diets of what they ate over a period of time. You know, when they ate more meat and when it became more vegetative. Is this interesting? So what happens, it does happen, is that towards the end of the Paleolithic age, although I'm going to be talking about civilizations in the Paleolithic age, towards the end of the Paleolithic age, the ice age ends and the waters rise. As you know, when ice melts, you know, water's got to go somewhere, and the waters rise and it gets a little warmer. And so those big old animals, the mammoth, you know, and as well as the reindeer, those animals then go north, and they're replaced by the deer, the rabbit, the gazelle. There is a problem with this. They're harder to catch. It's harder to hunt those. And when you do, you got less meat. And so all of a sudden, people kind of go through for about 400 years, you know, some soul, 400 years, sorry, not 400, I added 10, 4,000 years, apologize. They go through some soul searching, a lot of soul searching, and they need to have some. So what they start to do is they start focusing in on vegetative materials. Does that make sense? Because they have to compensate for the lack of meat. I have some Paleolithic, Neolithic friends who work at Ephesus, and they joke that this is the era. Of course, they say this in German. They joke this is the era where men are not bringing home the bacon. so Schweine. But the point of the matter is that you know, you still have them all excited, you know, being buried with their hunting implements, but you know, what are they? They're not bringing back much. So what happens is that now we're forced to focus on vegetative materials, and because of that, we learn agriculture. Does that make sense? So we kind of go through a hybrid. So many of these civilizations are kind of going through a hybrid. Sometimes they're not quite hunting, gathering, and they're not quite agriculture. They're in between. And that's what's fascinating to me, because that's where civilization starts, at that sweet point where all of a sudden they can stay in the same place and survive, right? Civilization can happen when you can stay in the same place. You don't have to go from place to place to place. And sometimes it doesn't mean agriculture proper. Sometimes it means kind of this hybrid. And I'm going to give you so many illustrations, you won't be able to stand it anymore. But I got to give you a nice little general overview as I go into the specifics. Is that cool? So you kind of know the bird's eye view there. And then, of course, once agriculture starts, then, of course, it's the Neolithic age, right? It's the beginning of that. So I hope that helps as an overview. And so you're going, okay, so where do we go from here? Oh, well, let's start with our first civilization. Okay, drum roll, please. The Gemone culture. Many scholars say that the first culture, the first civilization, is the Gemone culture. This is fat. You look it up. You know, this is good credibility. It starts in 14,500 BCE and ends in 300 BCE. Look it up. That's a long time. Where in the world is that? It's called Japan. Something happened. There is an anomaly, and I love talking about anomalies. So first of all, what happens is that, there's supposedly a primitive hunting and gathering culture, but they used to think that. But over the last couple decades, they started finding settlements, and these settlements became earlier and earlier and earlier. And it turned out that unlike many other Paleolithic people, the Gemone did not have to migrate. I didn't have to go around to find enough food because the food naturally flourished all around them. And in fact, it flourished enough for them to be able to be settled down, to have these gatherings, these places, the settlements that later on became villages. And of course, it also led to the increase of population. One thing that helped was rice. Now, rice, as we found out in 2012, was first cultivated in China at the Xianren cave in Xi'an, and goes back to 18,000 BCE. But at this time, there was kind of a land bridge that connected Japan with the continent. And so it very quickly, even though it was in China, it thrived in Japan. And the Jomon culture adopted that. But because of that, in fact, we actually have pieces of the first pottery at Odai, Yamamoto. We discovered that in 1998. And of course, this pottery dates back to you hear the word pottery, dates back to 14,500 BCE. The very first piece of pottery is 14,500 BCE in Japan. Yes, it goes back to 18,000 in China, but from here on out, we have pottery. Pottery, 4,000 years before the rest of the cultures around the world. Whoa, why? Why do they have pottery? Okay, let's just be boring for a second. I actually have some ancient pottery here, but I don't have time to run and get it. But I just want to say a few things. You know, pottery is not too popular if you're traveling from place to place. Because if you store something in a pot and you're traveling, you know what's going to happen? It's going to break. It's like, oops. So pottery is used for a settled culture. It has to be settled. And what they do is they store their food in the pot. It's like a box. It's like a container. It's like the refrigerator. It is where they put their seeds. It's where they put other kinds of foods. Does that make sense? So there you have it. So Japan, they have all these natural resources that are so close. I mean, everywhere. I mean, you also have all these edible nuts and acorns, because they got beech trees and buckeyes and chestnuts and oaks and then they have lots of fish and salmon and so forth. But in fruits, and the Jomon culture will cultivate the peach. That's where we get peaches from. I love peaches. That's one of my favorite fruits. But the point is that Jomon culture is civilized. And of course it comes up with all these great things, and that before everybody else. So it's kind of like a sneak peek before everybody else gets to it, the Jomon culture. Now, also, this gets a little controversial. We also know that, well, I'll just say this. They like using stone circles, and they were very much into stone objects being used for ritualistic purposes. The controversy is not the stone circles and used for ritualistic purposes in different places. The problem is how old are they? So most agree that they're being used during the period of time of the Middle Jomon, 2,500 BCE. Quite a few will say, well, actually, the initial Jomon, 7,500 to 4,000 BCE. So you have that. But a few others say, no. It goes back earlier. It goes back before 10,000 BCE, before the end of the last ice age. And we have found them underwater. Because, as I said before, when the ice age happens, everything's frozen. And then when it melts, the water level, the sea level rises, which means that those places would be underwater. So what will happen is we see underwater all of these stone formations, and now we get into a fight. between archaeologists and geologists, and what is natural and what is man-made and what is supernatural and aliens, So we enter into this area because all throughout the China Sea, all throughout between Japan going into China, which was, this was connected by a land bridge, we find of this evidence that seems to go back earlier. Now, this was more controversial before Göbekli Tepe. Because Göbekli Tepe, which everybody agrees upon, is from around 10,000 to 9,000 BCE in eastern Anatolia. Now of course, these are, these stone monuments, and we agree on that, and they're that old. Now that that's happened, saying that the Jabon culture had that roughly around the same time is not as controversial as it was before. Before it was like, ooh, this is an anomaly. Now it turns out it's just business as usual. And Stonehenge turns out to be kind of a newbie. So in all of this. So we take a look here. I don't want to spend forever in the Jabon culture, but I do want to say that the Jabon culture increased as far as Siberia. So it covered into China. It covered quite a large area. You did have, during the Middle Jabon culture, you have something called the Dogu figurines. I like the Dogu figurines. They're really interesting. These are made out of fired clay. They're in fantastic and creative shapes. They're kind of a mixture. Some are feminine in form. Sometimes they mix human and animal aspects, so half beast, half human. Some people say that they are used as effigies of people that was applied to sympathetic magic. For example, if one were like sick with a disease, the sickness was then transferred over to the Dogu object, and then the Dogu object was destroyed. The reason why people think that is because the majority of the Dogu that we have found have been intentionally destroyed. They have been intentionally broken. So that leads to that belief. Oh, also, the Dogu characters have like these goggles, and sometimes they have these looks like helmets. And of course, the ancient aliens, people are going, look, they're astronauts, they're astronauts. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But there you have it. Their faces are kind of heart-shaped in general. So who knows? And that's the Jabon culture. In 1995, they discovered the Jabon site of Sanai Morama, which revealed that they're definitely not a simple culture. The site revealed that they lived in large, elongated houses that were oftentimes raised on stilts. In fact, the configuration of these buildings show an understanding of math and geometry. In fact, there's even a giant monument there. It looks like a giant calendar structural that is connected to the placement of the sunrise and the sunset, and it's aligned also to mark Midsummer's Day. They're pretty sophisticated. So we're going to talk about one object that they found underwater that is okay. It's called the Yonaguni Monument. The Yonaguni Monument, Yonaguni. This is some people say it's pseudo-archaeology, other people say it's archaeology. It's kind of based upon who you ask. For years, the residents of Okinawa, they told stories to their children of how there's this ancient underwater city that had a mysterious castle that was just off the coast. And, it was the stuff of legends. The story told how a certain Taro Urashima was brought to the sea god's palace by a turtle that he had rescued. So it's a good thing to rescue turtles. He found the beauty of this underwater palace beyond description, just so beautiful. In 1986, a diver discovered what appeared to be a sunken city near the island of Yogonui Jima in the southern tip of Japan, near Okinawa. and describe what appear to be human-made structures located about 25 meters below the sea level. Of course, we take a look at this, and I would just say that supporters of this argument that it is human-made, they take a look at, and they realize that the cuts are very clean. There's no debris. They seem to be polished. There's apparent pathways around what looks like to be a monument, it seems to be. There's a circular aspect. There seems to be huge megaliths all around. So, yeah, maybe. Others say, no, this is a natural formation. And it goes back and forth. Now, I don't want to talk about all the people fighting about this, but I'll just give you a little hint here, what's going on here. So many of those people who say that this is made by the Jomon culture happen to be Japanese scholars. And many of those who say it's not just so happen to be American Canadian scholars. I don't know. I would just say that and many of these scholars who are Japanese, Masaki Kumura, professor emeritus from the Faculty of Science at Rekus University, Japan, who's also a credentialed marine geologist, says, well, it is, okay. And also, of course, Toru Uchi at Kobe University, another one, also says, yes, it is. But Robert Schluck, the associate professor of natural sciences and mathematics at Boston University, says it's not. You get the point. So it's kind of like some people say they accuse the Japanese that this is like patriotic, showing our civilization is earlier than the others. And then the Japanese are, well, no, we're just looking at this, and it just looks like it's not, it looks like it's, human made. And, because also they found another stone circle nearby, just along the way, that most agree it is human made, and it's underwater. So, okay. So we'll just let them fight. So what am I going to do? What's my answer? I do have an answer. As an archaeologist, it is my nature to be skeptical. I must say that the jury is out on this topic. I have visited places all over the world that appear to be human-made, but turn out to be completely natural. In dealing with archaeology from prehistoric places, from the Paleolithic into the Neolithic ages, context is key. Now, there is enough context to sway in between it being human-made and natural. All the indicators that could have possibly make the Yoganagi monument understood as human-made that we employ on above ground sites from this era are found here. But the question is how to interpret them. Also, the absence of loose blocks on the flat areas of the monument, which would be expected if they were formed solely by natural erosion and fracturing. It's not there. Professional geologists are also stumped. They're also in two different camps. So you know what? I have no answer for you. So it looks like there's no answer, but appears that it could be, but it may not be. So then we get to another site that's under contention, and that's called Gunung Padang, G-U-N-U-N-G-P-A-D-A-N-G. Also, some claim it's before 10,000 BCE. So where is this located? This is located in Indonesia. And so basically, this is a hill that is divided into successive terraces, each one defined by a retaining wall, which are all accessible by about 400 steps. There are also massive rectangular stones of volcanic origin that cover this hill. Locals consider Gunung Padang as sacred. The name means mountain of light. According to their beliefs, a certain king, Siliwangi, attempted to build a palace here one night, who reigned over the Sunda kingdom in West Java from 1482 to 1521. And he built an asymmetrical step pyramid into the side of the hill that faced the volcanic mountain gate used for their worship. So then along comes the Dutch, and they mentioned the site in 1914, and they identify these megalithic structures that are constructed with blocks of basalt around the summit of the hill in 1949. And again, in 1979, they examined it further. The southern side of the summit was cleared of all vegetation. It was obvious that the basalt blocks were arranged into 5 terraces with dates for this construction going back to 2500 BCE to 1500 BCE. Well, 2500 BCE is pretty early, but not quite the date we're looking for going back to the Paleolithic era. But what excited scholars was that the east side of the hill had 100 stone terraces. So they looked at this, and there seems to be a staircase there. In 2011, a certain Dr. Nata Wija began more systematic work upon the megalithic site. He conducted a survey in 2012 and carbon dated much of it, and he had surprising findings. The artifacts on the surface were dated to around 2800 BCE on the surface. But then he went down further in a deeper stratum, and he found that an earlier stratum dated around 4500 BCE. Then he went to levels, he went about 10 meters below that, and then he found another layer that dates to around 10,500 BCE. Uh-oh, now you see where we're going. Well, it seems to be earlier layers. So as he drilled deeper, he seemed to be coming up with deeper stratum. He did also geoelectrical, georadar and geomagnetic testing and looked through this, but then he kept going down. And then this is where scholars start to go, no, I don't know. He went 90 feet further and he found supposedly stratum that goes back to 18,000 BCE. And it's like, okay. And he says, guess what? It looks like the mound is a man-made pyramid. Oh, no. So you can see where we're going. So most scholars will say, okay, all right, wait, you went too far. But most scholars do agree that the surface, is yes, was modified. It goes back to the 2500 BC. In fact, others didn't have as much problem going back to the 4,000 to 5,000s, and a few 10,000. But once you get to 20,000, you lose a lot of people, But there you have it. So this could be an earlier site, but again, it's contested. It's fascinating in general. Oh, one thing that's also interesting about the some of the blocks made of andesite, you can knock one of these blocks and it makes a ringtone. I know, yeah. It's a rare geological occurrence. It's known as lithophony. Basically, the property of some rocks actually emit musical sounds under some kind of stress. So you could actually go around and knock some of these blocks and they'll make a musical sound. Dum, 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 dum. That's kind of cool. I mean, that alone is worth visiting the site. Now, there's another civilization that scholars all agree it goes to the Paleolithic age. Yes, we'll talk about them in a few seconds. It's called the Natufians. That's right, the Natufians. So we'll talk about them in a little bit, but before we get there, there's not just one, there's actually 3 civilizations that cross the threshold between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic. And so this is where it gets exciting, at least, well, for me. But first we have the Great Shift. The Great Shift is, from 13,000, 10,000 BCE, you got things getting warmer, life is changing, and because you have the larger game that's moving north, the smaller game's taken over, and people are focused more on vegetative materials. They're focused in, so agriculture doesn't exist yet, but they are still kind of figuring out things. They're learning how to, well, here's a plant, we're going to try to cultivate it where it's at, and we'll water it, we'll maintain it. So they start learning these things during this period of time where they can't have easy meat. So they're kind of forced to learn. So many of these cultures are kind of hybrid cultures during the Great Shift. I do want to say that there's a group of individuals that said, we're not going to adapt. And these people moved north with the big game. So most of the people decided we're going to adapt. We're going to eat less meat. We're going to eat more vegetative materials, more fiber, right? But we're going to adapt. And there's a group that just decided we're not going to adapt. And what they did is they followed the game north, the big game, because meat will last forever, right? So they moved north. The problem is that when you move north, this area was recently covered by ice, and that means that when it comes to plant life, it's not as vibrant and not as diverse. And so when it comes to the gathering aspect, it becomes less, which means, women were typically the gatherers, so their role gets a little less when they go more north. But meanwhile, south, it's more egalitarian, actually very much egalitarian. But north, it gets a little strange. Also, there seems to be this focus on the hunting culture, men, and so forth. And we see this change because what happens is that we have tons and tons of female figurines everywhere during this period of time. But when we go north, we see more and more male figurines appearing. So we see a change. We also see a change in burials where, women and men are buried kind of equally. Now we see men buried with some distinction and women disarticulated bones. So there is really concrete evidence that you can prove that there's a shift there towards patriarchy for those people at north. Meanwhile, egalitarian in the south. Is that making sense? This is something you can qualify in looking at the material culture, not just make things up, looking at their graves, looking at what they're leaving behind. But what, the meat doesn't last forever. Mammoth, they went crazy with mammoth. They made homes out of mammoth, with the bones, and wore mammoth clothing, and had mammoth all the time. And yeah, the mammoth, they went out. And so what happens is that the same group of people, also those did the same thing in Asia, in the area of Mongolia. They kind of ran out of the big game. And what they start doing is they start fighting each other for resources. Now they become more warlike because they're fighting over, less stuff. Now it's a warrior culture, right? Not just a hunter culture. And then after that, of course, since they're always migrating, they focus on the sky. And of course, the sky spirits. And of course, you see the patriarchal aspect there because the earth is giving less. We're kind of putting things together. And then all of a sudden they start to go south again because they're running out of things. And those are called Indo-Europeans, also known as Caucasians because of the Caucasus Mountains. And then around 5000 BCE, they start to spread all over the place and attack those cultures to the south and start to take over. Does that make sense? And that's where patriarchy moves across egalitarian. People always say that's Buddhist, that's myth. Hey, you know what? I can trace these people, okay, every 50 years as they move. So that's not a myth. If I can trace them by the material culture in the changes of their settlement patterns, in the houses, and the way they have their tools, in the way they bury their dead, and if I could trace that every 50 years and see them moving in, I don't think that's much of a myth to me. What do you think? And I can. In fact, I can tell it right now. I've drawn charts and maps. Is this fascinating? So there you have it. But let's forget those people because they're outside our scope. Let's go back to this great shift. So, well, we have a great shift, and so what will happen, I'll talk about it soon. We're going to have, of course, the Jamon culture survives the great shift pretty well. You have what's called the Quadon culture, and this is in Egypt. Actually, it's the Upper Nile River. and it straddles between the Paleolithic and Neolithic age. And we also, of course, have the Natufians. And so what turns out, at first, it's like, look, it's getting warmer. We're starting to adapt. We're in settlements. This is great, you know. We're also domesticating the gazelle because that makes sense. Things seem to be going okay. And then suddenly something happens, and civilization has to take a backseat. And that's called the Young Dryas catastrophe. The Young Dryas catastrophe. What had happened is that things were getting warmer, and then there's a hiccup. And all those civilizations I mentioned have to take a back step and become hunters and gatherers for a short period of time again. What happened? Well, what happened is that the Earth shifted, and temperatures on average, look it up, dropped 50 degrees, 50. So it's, if you're typically, this place is in their 80s, congratulations, it's in the 30s now. Freezing temperatures. And this lasts again from 10,900 to 9,600 BCE. That people don't, you know what happened during this period of time? Now, in the Americas, we lose quite a few animals. We lose, for example, the short-faced bears, the mastodons, the giant grand sloths, the saber-toothed cats. We lose the American camel, and the horses go extinct. So this is not a great period for, but animals happens all over. And so all of a sudden, you know, humanity is getting comfortable, and then it's like, uh-oh, we have to take a step back. What happened? Some people say there was a great flood that caused it. And other people say, well, no. I'm going to go with James Kennett. James Kennett, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Good source. He links the Young Dryas period to a cosmic impact event, that a comet collided with Earth. By the way, tonight we're going to have a near miss, by the way, coming up tonight, and so take a look at that up. So he put together an international research team from 21 universities in 6 countries, and they take a look, and they revealed in the ground these nanodiamonds of extraterrestrial nature at 32 sites in 11 countries, spanning an area of 50 million square kilometers across the entire northern hemisphere. This evidence is within plain sight. It's underneath California. So it's here. So, you know, so there's this thin black line that's a few meters below the surface. It's what it is. And so, and it of course, obviously we take a look, and this glassy metallic materials would only be found forged as a result of temperatures that would be about 2,200 degrees Celsius, which would mean, yes, it would be a meteorite kind of event. That's hotter than a wildfire or a volcano, is it right? So you guys getting this? So it seems to be a cosmic impact, and what that did is that just stopped the ice melting and got things cold again, and so we had to adapt. So I feel sorry for the Jamon culture, the Quadon culture, and the Tufians. You thought that we have it bad? You know, we're talking about global warming. Talk about something hitting us, but that kind of makes me insecure. Because if something like that happened before, something like that can happen again. Can you imagine 50 degrees colder? How do we survive? So let's talk about these heroic civilizations. We talked about the Jamon culture, which somehow didn't do so bad because it didn't hit that area. The Quadon culture, yeah, it impacted them. It did hurt the Middle East. So the Quadon culture is in northeast Africa along the Upper Nile River. It flourished between 13,000 and 9,000 BCE. They combined hunting and gathering culture, but it also included a determined focus on the collection and preparation of wild grains for consumption. You see the agriculture starting? You feel it, right? It's semi-agricultural, right? In fact, evidence reveals that there's local edible vegetation, that even though it was not planted, it was watered, it was nurtured, they're figuring things out. The Quadon culture then represents a transitional culture between the Paleolithic and Neolithic age. The Quadon stone tool industry reveals a high degree of specialization, revealing that the individual communities were settled enough to exhibit diversified manufacturing skills. Furthermore, stone tools varied according to regional groupings. Wait, hey, we're filling in what we need for civilization, are we not? Oh yeah, we are. Oh, I guess we got to change. Yes, we got to change our books, but nobody ever wants to do that, right? We also understand the religious beliefs. They were buried in simple oval pits that were rather shallow and covered over by a stone slab. We see this in other places too. Yet in some cases, the giant horns of wild cattle were positioned as markers for these graves, which I find is fascinating, because this idea of marking with giant horns continues in a symbolic sense even into the Egyptian early dynastic period. There seems to be some continuity, even with royal tombs. You see that. Again, I find that fascinating. And of course, obviously, there's a focus on veneration of cows, and we see that continuing on as well in Egyptian culture. So I find it interesting. Now, unfortunately, they didn't do very well when it came to lifespan, and really terrible. I feel during the Young Dryas period, these poor people. I'm sorry. I know a lot of you are going, they're just people, dates, but to me, I see humans, and I see that's the way I work. And so I'm probably the only person who looks at an ancient grave site and I start to weep for some of these people, because I got to tell you this. What happened is this: is that they have found people, they lived not very long. We have their bodies. There's a lack of infant bones in certain places. In fact, one child per grave site. But they would do is they would bury the infants on the floors of their homes, so that their babies would always be with them. But there's a lot of infants in those places. So there's a high infant mortality. People are not living very long. They're living into their 20s, maybe get to 30. It's over. Anyway, so kind of sad. Also, they're fighting each other. In fact, 40% of the individual burials in one cemetery at Jebel Sahaba, this is the border of Sudan, they found that 40% showed signs of fatal wounds caused by projectiles. So they're fighting each other, and they're fighting over because diminishing resources. The Young Dryas period of time, humanity is desperate. Parts of us, we could have been wiped out in those areas. I mean, come on, 50 degrees is tremendous. I think it's amazing that we survived. I really do. So, yay, good people. Let's start with the Natufians. The Natufians, the same thing. They have thrived between 13,000. They used to date to 9,000. Now we know it's 13,000 to around 7,500 BCE. These are the Natufians. The Natufians covered a wide area. I'll tell you what the Natufians cover in geographical location today. They cover what is now Israel, Palestine, Jordan, parts of Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Eastern Turkey. That's all Natufian. So in many cases, people say Göbekli Tepe is also a Natufian site. That famous 10,000 BCE, it's Natufian. The Tufians are very settled. They were part of that transition between a hunting and gathering society to agriculture proper. So they're making that change. Those who say that the Natufians were indeed in eastern Anatolia and eastern Turkey, they then would be those who first started agriculture. Okay, so this is where it starts. Thank you, Natufians. Some scholars say that the Natufians cultivated the first fig. We find the first fig in Jericho around 9,400 BCE. Some also say they cultivated the dates. So they also were said to cultivate wheat. Again, as I mentioned, the Natufians retained an egalitarian society. They were equal. Men and women were equal. And that continued all the way through the civilization. They especially venerated the supernatural world in feminine forms. And they connect fertility with female with the earth. So there you have it. Now, I do want to say that they're doing great. We'll talk about how great they were doing. And then all of a sudden, the temperatures dropped. There is evidence that at one point, the average temperature, hold your breath, was 12 degrees. So we see all of a sudden these big settlements go, all of a sudden disappear, and the populations die. We find all these grave sites everywhere. Again, I get sad about this. And then they go back to migrating from place to place. They lose civilization. And then when it gets warmer again, by the way, it gets warmer in only 10 years. It gets that cold in 10 years, and it gets that warm in 10 years again. Isn't that interesting? But meanwhile, you get this long period of time between, it's freezing cold. But you can imagine. And then as soon as that happened, they readapted and they started their settlements again. I got to tell you, the Natufians, they're my heroes. And these are resilient people. All right. So, and these are the people who are the backbone of those who are throughout the Middle East today. Just telling you, the Natufians. That's a strong cultural heritage, and one to be very proud about. Okay, so what happens? The Natufians are directly affected, and many of the established Natufian villages became disappeared. The crisis also stopped their innovations in agriculture. They're kind of getting there, and then they have to backtrack. But then after it's over, then they go back to normal again. Thank you very much. And one of the sites is Jericho. Jericho became a center of trade, especially by 9,600 BCE. And now we're entering into the Neolithic age, right? So now we crossed over the threshold. This became one of the earliest cities known, Jericho. Doesn't mean it's the earliest. And many people are saying Göbekli Tepe may have had some kind of village or settlement connected to it. We found a little bit of evidence for that, but we're talking about a city. Well, a city, 70 mud brick houses. They're built on stone foundations, and it was a home for about 1,000 people during that time. But the city still covered around 9 acres, so they're kind of spread out. And at one point later on, they had walls that were 6 meters deep, and they even had a constructed round tower that was 8.5 meters in diameter with a solid stone core, with a steep staircase leading to the top, and currently preserved to be 7.7 meters in height. And yes, I have seen this in person. I have been there. I have walked the site. I've investigated that. I have been with the archaeologists at the site. This is something I've some firsthand experience in this one. And of course, the idea is, what is it? What is this tower? And everybody fights about it. So those who are the military historians will say it's a defensive tower, but it's not really located along the wall at all. It doesn't look like it has any strategic importance, but there it is. Some people say, no, it's a high tower used for religious purposes. I could see that, Yeah, maybe, possibly. We don't know, but it does represent the idea that you had to have a strong central authority to be able to coordinate enough people to work and to build the structure that is still very well organized. You Google it, you see it, you go, okay, this has some form of sophistication. I can see why. So that's the Natufians. The Natufians also had something in Jericho and other places too called the skull cult. The skull cult is as follows. I'll tell you the story. Basically, what happens is that let's just say let's be optimistic and say it's grandma, not mom or dad. But so grandpa passes. So what they do is they take grandpa's body and they do excarnation. The birds eat everything off. That's all clean. And then what they do is they take grandpa's body, but not his head, and bury it under the house. Got it? They take his head then, his skull, and they completely fill it with clay. And then they paint it a flesh color with seashells placed in the eye sockets. And then they put it on a small red pedestal. Yes, red ochre paint. Right? And they situate that skull looking out towards the front door. So everyday life in Jericho is like, hey, Mom, I'm home. And you look inside the door and there's the friendly skull of your grandpa. Oh, that's great. So it seems to be connected with ancestor cult. It's protective. He's looking after. Now let's just say grandma dies. They do the same thing. Okay. So they take grandma's body, they clean it all off, excarnation. And then what they do is it's like rotating tires. They take grandpa's skull and they bury it towards the edge, foundation, the exterior part, kind of facing outward. And they put grandma's head now on that red pedestal. So the most recent dead person is the one on that pedestal. So it's kind of like, hey, they're kind of straddling the realm of life and death. And they're the most, and so they kind of create that conversation, that communication. Isn't that fascinating? And this is the Natufians for you. The Natufians also, they had their tombs and their various tombs, so they bury their dead that way. But other places, I'll mention a place by Mount Carmel, they decided we're going to use another technique. What we're going to do is we're going to bury our dead under what's called pipe mortars. And basically they bury the dead and they have this stone with a hole in it. A lot of people don't know what the hole is for. Some people say what it's for is to put food in it to feed the dead. Other people say, no, it's to put a pole in a monumental sense. And it's, so to mark the grave. Other people say, no, it's used to put a phallus in. I'm thinking, okay, some of these archaeologists have been out in the sun too long. So there you have that. So that's fascinating. Now, furthermore, as far as being buried with various goods, usually it's shells. They like shells. But in some cases, they would bury them with flowers. So there you have it. One interesting grave, which I'm going to bring up, is there's actually a couple. There's a couple that are buried, and the whole thing is lined with flowers all the way around. Oh, I forgot to mention. They oftentimes bury themselves, if not buried under the floors of their houses in the settlement areas, sometimes they'll be buried out in the middle of nowhere with their doggy. That's right. So, hey, dogs start getting domesticated, and it's like, yeah, get buried with your dog. Oh, and they finally figured out to cultivate something called the gazelle. The gazelle, yes, what a dream. Gazelles, right? They learned the hard way that gazelles don't really work. You can see that domesticated, they had find little pins where they domesticated the gazelles. But apparently gazelles, they jump out of things. They escape. But it took us about 4,000 years to figure out that the gazelle, we can't domesticate them. That's probably because people are living too short of lives. It's kind of like, it's like, you know what? I don't think this gazelle, next person, I don't think the gazelle is going to, they don't live long. And so 4,000 years, they're living with the mistake of this gazelle just not working out. Fortunately, they moved on to goats. And goats next, domestication. But that didn't work out very well because goats, as you know, as I observed today, I was at a college today where you have the goats there, they're eating, they pull the grass right out by the roots. And so when they do that, they start denuding the entire landscape. So the Natufians have an environmental disaster of these goats clearing up all the grass, and they're pulling it all out by the roots. And then it rains, and the rain basically washes away the topsoil, and then you got desert. Did you know that some parts of the deserts of Jordan and parts of the Gaza Strip and are caused because of those wonderful goats? We're still living with the environmental impact of those Natufians going, oh, this is not working out. And then they switch over to go to sheep. It took them 500 years, though, to figure out the goats are not working out. And so goats were modified, although they still drank goat milk. And they moved to sheep. And the sheep are cool because they eat the tops of the grass and they don't pull it all out. And that's perfect. So lovely, lovely sheep. I think goats are cute, especially when they jump and they fall down. But apparently not great when it comes to being your major source. Other bits and pieces I want to talk about the Natufians, is as follows. You guys ever heard of the or so you have female leadership? I want to bring up this too. They found what's called a Natufian priestess is discovered at Hilazon, Tashtet in Israel. She was a lady of high status who died when she was around 45 years old. So she died older. And this is around 10,000 BCE, just before the Young Dryas period. She's approximately 5 foot tall. She was surrounded with exactly 50 tortoise shells that were carefully arranged to signify some meaning, along with parts of various animals, eagles, pigs, leopards. And one odd find was a human foot. So, there you have it. And by the way, during this same period of time, around the world, they have this new idea. It's like, we're not just going to cut off your head. In some places, we're going to cut off your feet too. So, hey, apparently they want to make sure you're dead. So, and that became popular, not just the Natufians, but in Egypt. It's like, and even in Eastern Europe, it's like, cut the head off, cut the feet off. They're not going to come back this way. It looks like they're a little afraid of or doing something with this in a ritualistic sense. But there you have it. One fascinating part is called, have you guys ever heard of the Ain Sakri lovers? The Ain Sakri lovers. This is the first depiction, this is Natufian, of a male and female making love. These two lovers were carved out of a single stone and are directly facing one another. Their legs are intertwined, and in one case, one is holding the other's face in a gentle way, and they're looking at each other face to face. You're feeling the egalitarian sensibility? Are you seeing that? Yeah, it's not, face to face. Now, it's interesting. Yet when these figures are looked at from behind on either side, as opposed to side by side, the images are undeniably a phallic symbol. Then, when you look at the image from below, it's absolutely the yoni, the vagina. And you look at it from above, it's breasts. Beautiful piece, creative, abstract thinking. You got male and female depictions combined together as one. Google it and take a look. It's amazing. So, well, a product possibly of the Natufian culture. You like the Natufians? Oh God, I'm a big fan. And I've seen Natufian sites, and I'm, it's worth seeing. Göbekli Tepe, some have identified as a Natufian site. This is the oldest identified temple, maybe, or sacred enclosure. It dates from 10,000 to 9,000 BCE. The way I say that, 10,000. Okay. It's located 6 miles from Urfa in eastern Turkey today. And a site perched 1,000 feet above a valley called Göbekli Tepe, which basically means belly hill. Not okay. So they thought at first that the ruins were of a medieval site. Boy, were they wrong. They found this 22-acre site, and it's distinguished by circular rows of stones that intentionally face inward, pointing to what resides at the center of the ring, a series of limestone T-shaped pillars, most rising as high as 3 meters, which is 10 feet high. However, with one even taller, actually, this one is 18 feet high, and it weighs up to 16 tons. There's a ritual significance to this design. It has certain similarities to Stonehenge, but dating a lot earlier, right? Is estimated it took a labor force about 500 workers to create this complex of Göbekli Tepe, which tells you there's a high degree of organization here. You're saying, well, is this a civilization? Well, there's obviously a civilization that fits in all the categories creating it, but the question is, what exactly does it look like? But there's more. Various animals were chiseled onto the pillars, including snakes, lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures. Animal bones were discovered about the site that were cut in ritualistic ways. So we see the cut marks of the bones. So we know that these were used for animal sacrifices. Amongst the 15,000 bone fragments found here, over 60% of the bones are, well, of course, gazelles. They love these gazelles, right? The most popular source of meat at that time, followed by boars, sheep, and red deer. Okay. It is believed that these animals were guardians to the spirit world. Reliefs on the T-shaped pillars illustrate that there are also stylized humans on there. And in fact, there's carved arms at an angle that goes from shoulders. And since they're T-shaped, it looks like that maybe they represent people with their arms stretched out in a circle. Isn't that fascinating? In stone, right? Göbekli Tepe was established just prior to the advent of agriculture. In fact, agriculture was discovered like really nearby. It appears to be completely ceremonial. So archaeologists, are fighting over if there are public structures or domestic structures or not. They fight over that. Some say there were, some say there weren't. I'm kind of hinging on the side that there were, but it was still built by a hunter-gathering society, but demonstrated that religion was organized enough before the advent of agriculture to create something that is defined by something that a civilization would create. Now, the people must have lived within a 100-mile radius of the site. So what's another curious part is this, and that is as follows, that every so often, the stone rings were buried. Now, there's a fight over whether this is naturally occurring or this was deliberate, and the jury is out on that. But what they would do is that they would then rebuild it. So it appears that a large outer ring was built with a second smaller ring that was constructed inside the first later on. And then apparently a few decades later, a third inner ring was constructed. After this, the whole area was filled with debris and they started all over again. Many understand that the center of this ring could represent also a sacrificial mouth where the bones are found to feed the earth, the blood, in a sense. So they're feeding the earth, and so it's like a mouth. But also, there's also evidence to reveal that there could have been a roof on top of the T-shaped pillars, so that it was covered over at a certain point, and perhaps it was partly underground, and then the ground just fell on it. Does that make sense? To cover it up. We don't know for a fact for sure. What we do notice is this, which is kind of interesting, is that with every subsequent building, it's poorer. It's made worse. That there seems to be a de-evolution. That the best of the best is the earliest. And then it starts to get, the best carvings, the best structures, the best, looks organized, neat. And as time goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse. And it seems like civilization is de-evolving here. Wow, going the other way. It has many people thinking, well, wait a minute, the sea, much of the shoreline remember the ice melted and it covered up the majority of the shoreline throughout the world. And maybe these advanced civilizations were along the shore that's now underwater. Got it? And so maybe these were advanced civilizations, and then they went in hinterland, and then they built these, they built Göbekli Tepe and some of these other sites, which of course you can see how this also strengthens the Jomon culture idea we talked about earlier. Are you seeing these connections? Yep. So there you have it. Göbekli Tepe is not the only one either. There is another site like Göbekli Tepe that's nearby called Navali Kori. And it dates around the same period of time, and it's nearby. Here, the inhabitants did live in rectangular houses containing 2 or 3 parallel flights of rooms with multi-layered foundations made of angular cobblers and boulders and so forth. And beneath these floors, they have found channels. What are they for? They went along the main axis of these houses. They may have been used for drainage. Also maybe used to cool these houses. There was a cult center on the hill just north of the main settlement, and like Göbekli Tepe, features monolithic pillars incorporated into stone walls. Various figures were found here, as well as a life-size human head with the hair depicted as shaven except for a tuft or a snake ponytail in back, which is fascinating. Also, they found the earliest full-size human images made out of limestone. They found what appeared to be masks as well. So again, pretty sophisticated and so forth. And we see, of course, the beginning of agriculture here. Of course, agriculture now begins during this period of time. It starts at different times, of course. We will go through our agricultural speech because I want to make sure that we get to a few other goodies. I'm seeing that time is up, but I want to just capture a few other places. I want to say that we do have the emergence now of, once we're settled down in one place, now we get, hey, guess what? It's time for pottery. It's like, wait. Jomon cultures all did that, done that 4,000 years earlier, but now it's everybody else says, yeah, we can stay around and we can store things. Now, I know we look at pottery and we look at this, like the pottery shack. We see these little cute little pots and we're thinking that's what pottery is. Well, sometimes the pottery was as big as I am. And then they bury it in the ground and they bury it in the back of the dwelling. And so they put all the seeds there. And in some cases, especially when we get to the Chalcolithic age, they would actually bury themselves in their own pots. It'd fit. And then with infants, they put them in the small pots. And sometimes they want them to have accompaniment. So they put the little 2 pots together with the infants. So they, with the lips together. Interesting. So sad, again, high infant mortality. This is making sense. You guys got it? So pottery. And of course, I guess, if you your life with the pot. Okay. So this is where you get the term potter's field, right? Potter's field. Yeah. Buried in pots. This idea continued into the Greek and Roman period. Did you guys know that? Yeah. Greeks and Romans, sometimes even outside of Athens, people are buried in their pots. So not chamber pots, but, pots. So we love pottery. I mean, we're big into that. And of course, now, as a result, we can do like dating better, doing a trace element analysis, for example. We could do that. mostly by neutron activation, allows the source of the clay to be accurately identified, so we know where this clay came from, where it's fashioned. As a result, we know who's trading from where, because if you find a clay pot, that's not, from the region, you can figure out what region it's from. So we're able to identify trade routes. Obviously through a thermoluminescence tests, we can provide an estimate of the date of the last firing, and so we can date it that way. So kind of cool. In fact, I'll go a little bit further. We can also learn how, through high temperature firing, iron materials in the clay, which can record the exact state of the Earth's magnetic field at that exact moment. So when it was fired. So fun stuff, lots of fun with clay. That's why archaeologists love pots. We get all excited. We see pottery going, ooh. And I should have my pottery with me today, because I have a whole bunch of ancient pottery that goes back quite a ways, including thousands of years. But I didn't think ahead of time, and it probably wouldn't see it very well anyway, holding up to there. But there you have it. Okay, so we also have, of course, textiles. Now that we're settled in, we can make clothes. So we can grow it. So that's cool. And of course, obviously, it's the sheep, right? So the wool, so that starts there, but also like in India, cotton as well. And then, of course, we have metallurgy, for the stone tools, for the metal tools. That's inclusive, of course, not just for weapons, but for agriculture. Well, I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say, can I stick in a few extra civilizations just because, just for fun? Okay, so we got the Pentoshan culture, 8,200 BCE to 6,100 BCE. This is the Yangtze River in China. This is, of course, and at this point, again, we have the cultivation of natural rice, but it's a large rice that's unusual. Now, but we find, most notably, this is what the earliest defensive walls and ditches that we have discovered in China. So this is the beginning of, I think we have somebody that doesn't like us. So let's build a wall, Yes, you have it in other regions, but for China, this is the beginning that there seems to be some kind of threat from somewhere coming along. We also have in China the Pilong culture from 7,000 to 5,000 BCE. Once again, as opposed to rice, it was millet cultivation. And some of the earliest arrowheads and spearheads used for hunting in the region were discovered here. And some of China's earliest pottery, but not the earliest, were found here too. We also have the Murah culture around 7,000 BCE of Pakistan and India. They once again, they lived in mud brick houses. They stored their grain in granaries. They fashioned tools with local copper ore, and of course they made their baskets sealed with bitumen. But what I want to bring up is that early on they figured out, here it is, proto-dentistry. What? Yeah. So 7,000 BCE, it's time for the dentist. So they have found drillings in human teeth, including fillings. So they found 11 drilled molar crowns in 9 adults. It's just worth it just to get to that, right? So, we're still in the Paleolithic age, and they're already, dentistry is coming about. Oh, I made it to the Yarmoukins. Yay, Yarmoukins. Yarmoukins, Neolithic culture, named after the Yarmouk River in Israel. The Yarmoukians thrived between 6,400 to 6,000 BCE. They occupied much of the Jordan Valley. They're known for their distinctive pottery, decorated with horizontal and zigzag bands, right? But the Yarmoukians are most noted for their plethora of fertility goddess figurines, typically made out of pottery, but also limestone river pebbles. Often their heads are elongated and pointed, with their eyes made to resemble kernels of grain, right? One from Shara Hagolan combines the symbolism shown as seated with exaggerated hips, holding her breasts, and having kernel-shaped eyes. A very, again, overt connection to fertility, both for human reproduction, of course, and fertility of the fields. In fact, at Shar Hoglan, 130 of these Yarmukhian figurines were uncovered, with 50 more found in Munhata. In fact, these figurines are everywhere, so all over. But a few of these are male, and you see a male phallic symbol, but some have people confused. Some are androgynous. These figurines are neither male nor female, and in many cases, they have breasts and a male member. They have both. Some scholars have theorized this could indicate the existence of a theoretical third sex amongst the Yarmukhian culture. Others say that the contrasting sexual characteristics on the same image demonstrates the concept of a trickster by nature. Others say that this is the idea of the male and the female combining together as one and worship as together as the combination of both. You can go with any one of these, but I think it's fascinating. The Hala culture, 6,100 to 5,500 BCE. This is in the Fertile Crescent region. And once again, we see tons of these female figurines everywhere. We also find female figurines that are not voluptuous. They are thin, and they're holding children. They're holding babies. In some cases, they have the head of reptiles. Okay. And then we have Çatalhöyük, because I know a few people wanted to make sure that Çatalhöyük would be talked about. So I got the Çatalhöyük, 6,500 to 3,500 BCE. Central Asia. Çatalhöyük is sometimes looked at as connected to a later Natufian culture. It covers 32 acres, characterized by densely packed rectangular houses overlapping one another, so that they had to be entered via ladders through the roof, much like you have with the indigenous peoples of the Americas. And of course, in typical Mediterranean fashion, the rooms are surrounding a central courtyard. It's interesting because looking at the dwelling places, there's lots of wall paintings depicting bulls and leopards. Lots of bulls going on here all around the city. And it looks to me that 1/3 of the houses were set aside for ritualistic purposes because there's no residential use for them, but they're intermingled in space with domestic areas. So you kind of go right from a domestic area to a ritualistic area and then back into the domestic. It's fat, and they're kind of overlapping and built on top of each other. It's kind of neat. I like it. Not that I want to live in that community, but you can see that's very egalitarian in many ways. Everybody living equally. They all seem that there doesn't seem to be a privileged class, just working together. But you know what? Also, I got to mention that meanwhile, we take a look, and just like in Jericho and other places, they bury their dead under their houses. That's right. Yes. And in many cases, they're without their heads, and their heads are buried elsewhere. And also, the excarnation, birds pecked away at it. So we find these bodies sometimes under the floor, sometimes around the hearth, sometimes directly under the bed. There's no skeletons under the closet. No. We have skeletons under the bed. Can you imagine, sleeping with all these dead people under? But you know what? For them, let's get into their culture. For them, that was comforting. Did you know for them, why would you bury your loved ones way out there in the middle of nowhere when they could be close and protective of your home? They're watching after you. Why would you throw them away? So when I know it's a different cultural belief, but I think we need to respect it. because now don't do this today. If a relative passes away, don't bury them under the house because that's called a crime scene. But I'll be in trouble. But you got to respect them because I can understand why they would want to have their heritage, their legacy under their homes, close. So in a sense, they're always with them. And that tradition continues on with infants. Even if it was in Egypt, though, with infants even later on, that at least you'll bury those that you have lost under your floors. Now, that's the positive aspect. However, in areas of Phoenicia and Israel, that not as positive, and Carthage not as positive. They would actually ritually sacrifice the youngest baby. I mean, so that the firstborn, and to dedicate the house and protect you. But yuck. But anyway, but in this case, not as negative. It died as an infant in the positive sense. Also, of course, once again, we find fertility figurines everywhere, and we find also figurines of skinny ladies holding babies, and in many cases with the head of reptiles, but with a nice, beautiful wig. So that makes them look pretty. So they got the wig going, reptile face, wig. And a lot of people wonder, why in the world do they have a face of reptiles? Maybe it has to, reptiles shed skin. Maybe it has to do with rejuvenation. Once again, possibly fertility. We don't know, but things do change. Now, I know we have to come to some kind of close. And so I'll close with this one. The Ubaid culture, 6,500 to 3,800 BCE. This is another sophisticated culture. Once again, this is in the southern part of Mesopotamia. Now, because of the high water table near the Persian Gulf, they were unable to find suitable soil to cultivate wheat and barley. But they were able to do other ways to survive. They also had a very complicated irrigation system. Most of the residential houses were composed of mud brick, rectangular in form, consisting of one room. Public buildings included a vast array of prominent temples. But why am I talking about them? They came up with this great invention. It's called the pottery wheel. And I think that's really significant. Okay, so, but one other thing, something else happens. We take a look at the Ubaid culture, and we see that it's egalitarian at the deepest levels. Male and women and men are buried equally. But then as you go further up, it changes and becomes more dominated by men, and men are buried with more significance. The same thing happens. The earliest level, we find mostly female figurines. And as you go further up, we're finding more diversity of figurines. Are you following me? Right? So it looks like patriarchy does come, and you could actually trace it in the stratums of the Ubaid culture between 6,500 to 3,800 BC. You just have to take a look. We also, there's some other interesting representations. We see some images that look like tattoos and so forth. Lots of fun stuff. But we could trace that. And it turns out that during this time that the Indo-Europeans are sweeping down. And the Indo-Europeans do not arrive in this area, but they are just to the north, and their culture and their patriarchal perspectives are starting to spread into the Middle East. What I'm trying to tell you is that the Middle East was egalitarian, and then around between 5,000 to 4,000 BCE, when the Indo-Europeans sweep across from the Caucasus Mountains, start around 5,000 BCE, and they sweep down just north of the Fertile Crescent, that starts to influence this region. And then, of course, the Indo-Europeans continue on their way to, of course, go to Persia, because Indo-Europeans are Persians, right? And then they continue and they arrive in India between 2000 to 1500 BCE. And they arrive, and they are the Indo-Europeans, also known as the Aryans, the ones who arrive in India who bring, of course, the Vedic culture, okay, which is fascinating. And of course, what they do is they try to mix with the Mundas and the Dravidians, who are the indigenous, right? The Indus Valley civilization are the Dravidians as well as the Mundas. This is fascinating. And so patriarchy arrives in that area. Now, a lot of people say, no, that's not true. Yes, all you have to do is let's do some DNA, will you? And we do the DNA of people even today in northern India, and we find the R1 haplogroup, which is, of course, the Indo-European haplogroup in the blood, mostly amongst the Brahmin caste. Done. Also, we have the pottery we could trace as they move across. Also, we have the settlement patterns as we can trace across. Are you following me? Also, we can see how their burial patterns across. It's consistent. And when they arrive in a new area, it changes. Meanwhile, the Indo-Europeans go the opposite direction as well. They go through Europe. They go to Greece. The Minoans are not Greeks. They are not Indo-Europeans, and they are egalitarian. But then the Mycenaeans, who are Indo-Europeans, they arrive and they place their own perspective on there. And then, of course, it moves across and goes into Illyria and, of course, into the areas of the Western Mediterranean. And, of course, Indo-Europeans are obviously everybody from Slavs to Germanic groups to anybody, to Latins to, and then of course the indigenous earlier culture is underneath. There is intermarrying going on. That's why people look different in different areas, because it's the old, Punnett square, right? You have the gene factor. And so you have certain dominant traits, and those dominant traits of those indigenous peoples do carry on. So you can see still the markings of this earlier culture etched off across the faces and body builds of those people in Southern Europe, as well as North Africa. Is this interesting kind of stuff? As well as going into India. So are you guys having fun yet? So this is a great change. But that, of course, means that we're also moving into the Chalcolithic age, and we're out of the Neolithic. But we covered, these civilizations. So guess what? If you follow the beginning, if you follow the classic definition of a civilization, we have actually covered many civilizations that do fit in with that criteria. A lot of people roll their eyes, but I'm sorry, if you're checking off all the boxes, that's still a civilization. I guess people but we want to start with the Mesopotamian Fertile Crescent. That's fine. Just realize there's other civilizations before, and they thrived. But it is also a story. It's a story of human survival. It is humanity facing some of the gravest threats, where it seemed that some places that we could have gone extinct, and yet we didn't. We were resilient. So it's not necessarily a negative story. It's a story of people working together, doing their best to survive all these kinds of obstacles and still come out in the end. And of course, my heroes are still the Natufians, They came on back, they got knocked out and they came on back. And that hardy stock is still the backstock of so many in the Middle East today. So there you have it. There's my talk. The curtain is closed. Thank you so much.